Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the most iconic and successful game franchises in the history of gaming. Created just 11 years ago by Scott Cawthon, it has taken the gaming world by storm, spawning 16 games, both mainline and spin-offs, 41 books, and even a movie.
I always come back.
It's safe to say that the FNaF franchise has become a household name. Whether you're a hardcore fan or a casual observer, you've likely heard of the franchise. If you followed the lore of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, you're probably familiar with the tragic, eerie tales surrounding the animatronic characters, haunted locations, and twisted mysteries. The mainline story has captured the attention of millions with its intricate webs of secrets, conspiracies, and chilling events. But what if I told you there's another layer of lore? Something darker, more secretive, and possibly more fascinating than anything you've ever heard of before. The hidden lore isn't about the animatronic creatures or the haunting of the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria. No, it's about a man, someone whose life went from absolute failure to extraordinary success. This man's journey is filled with ups and downs, failures and controversies, and yet, against all odds, he rose to unimaginable heights. You may think you know where the story is going. It's not just some lost soul trapped in a haunted world or an animatronic with a tragic past. It's the story of someone who turned one of his greatest failures into the foundation of success. A person whose struggles mirrored those of many game developers. Someone who faced rejection, doubt, and disappointment before finally finding his big break. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for a story that will keep you at the edge of your seat. Grab your popcorn, because this tale is about to take a surprising turn. Because the truth is, this isn't about a character in the game at all. It's about Scott Cawthon. I know what you're thinking. Wait. How is Scott Cawthon a part of the lore of the Five Nights at Freddy's universe? Didn't he just create the games? Most videos and articles focus it on the games themselves, the haunted animatronics, eerie locations, and twisted stories, but they often overlook something crucial: Scott Cawthon's own mental and emotional journey, his rise and fall as a game developer, and honestly, it's one of the most fascinating and overlooked aspects of this FNaF lore. Scott's story is one of a family man who, after years of desire, finally found his success, but now without facing unbelievable amounts of failure and adversity along the way. Honestly, hearing this story now makes me love the franchise even more. From an early age, Scott loved video games and animation. His fascination, like many, drove him to pursue a college degree in animation. His dream was simple: to turn his degree into the foundation of his own game company. However, the path to success was far from easy. His first release was a game called Doofus, a game that Scott made at the age of 16 in the 1990s before even entering college. And to be blunt, this game was what you would expect from a 16-year-old at the time trying to create his first game. Interesting and rough around the edges. Almost a decade later, Scott released RPG Mac, a follow-up project. However, when I took a look into it for footage or any references to the game, I found nothing. In fact, RPG Max is just one of what we're going to be calling lost games to that have never been seen again. In 2003, the year of my birth, Scott released 10 games, but again, there was barely any trace of these titles. The next major release was Stellar Gun, and pretty much that was just a ripoff of Asteroids. It didn't really catch much attention of players or critics anywhere. Throughout the years, Scott continued to pump out various medias, much of it relatively uninspired and whitewashed. Despite all of his efforts, success was elusive, and with each release, he saw little financial gain or recognition. By 2008, Scott was facing a harsh reality that his dream of becoming a successful game developer might never come true. Though he released titles like Desolate Land or If for Moon, these games flopped due to their poor timing, limited promotion, and saturated market of indie games. Despite their high quality, the games never gained the recognition they deserve. And after doing research, I'm actually interested in playing these games myself. After nearly a decade of creating games, Scott was at an all-time low. He had poured his heart and soul into these projects, but they brought him little financial reward. During this time, Scott also worked on animations, but they too were financial failures. Scott became consumed by depression. His dreams of becoming a successful game designer were slipping away, and the weight of it all began to take a toll on his mental health, so much so that at his darkest moment, he contemplated suicide. His personal life became strained, and his financial duties seemed insurmountable. At one point, his life insurance company cut ties with him, an additional reminder of how far he'd fallen. Scott had given almost everything he had to his craft, but he didn't reap any rewards. He was a man on the verge of giving up, with nothing to show but years of struggle. It was during this incredibly low period that one seemingly small piece of feedback would change everything. In 2013, Scott released a game called Chipper & Sons Lumber Company. It was a lighthearted title featuring cartoon animals, but his feedback received about characters was a game changer. Someone told Scott that his animals in Chipper & Co. looked quote-unquote too scary for a children's game. It was in that moment that Scott's entire perspective shifted. He realized that he had accidentally created a horror aesthetic, and that maybe he could capitalize on that fear factor. That feedback pushed Scott to rethink his entire approach to game design. Instead of focusing on cute, friendly games, he could embrace fear. And this was the catalyst for Five Nights at Freddy's. When Five Nights at Freddy's released in 2014, it took the gaming world by storm. The simple premise, a night guard being trapped in a haunted pizzeria, coupled with the creepy animatronics, terrified players and set the internet abuzz. The game was an instant success, catapulting Scott from the depths of despair to the heights of fame and wealth. Suddenly, Scott was a household name. Fans of all ages were drawn to the game's unique blend of survival, horror, mystery, and tension. The viral popularity of the game turned Five Nights at Freddy's into a cultural phenomenon, spawning sequels, spin-offs, books, movie adaptations, and fan games. Scott had finally achieved the success he had always dreamed of, but it also came with some challenges of its own. The success of Five Nights at Freddy's has changed Scott's life in ways where he couldn't have anticipated. The sudden rise to fame brought intense public scrutiny. As the face of a global franchise, Scott had to adjust being into the public eye. The pressure to deliver new games and keep the fan base engaged was overwhelming at times. He no longer just struggled being an indie developer, he was a public figure with millions of fans and critics watching his every move. On top of that pressure, Scott faced personal attacks and criticism from some fans. There were those who were unhappy with the direction the series was going, while others criticized his religious views or personal choices. Scott had to learn how to navigate the complexities of fame, and it wasn't easy. He'd gone from being relatively unknown to being thrusted into a world of intense expectations and constant scrutiny. In interviews, he admitted that he was uncomfortable with the attention and the constant pressure, and it took a toll on him mentally. Despite all of this, Scott remained humble, always stressing about how grateful he was for the Five Nights at Freddy's game franchise. He continued to release new games in the series, trying his best to balance fans' expectations with his own creative vision. I'm going to be honest, Scott Cawthon is an inspiration, and how could he not be? Just think about his journey for a moment. A man who dedicated 2 decades of his life to chasing a childhood dream, only to face failure after failure, hardship after hardship, and still, somehow, rise to the worldwide success. His story is nothing short of remarkable, and it serves as a beacon of hope for anyone who has doubted themselves or wondered if success is possible after repeated setbacks. It's not about the games or the franchises he built. It's about the grit, the determination, and the relentless spirit that propelled him forward despite all the odds. He didn't just create Five Nights at Freddy's out of thin air, he crafted it throughout years of failure and introspection, turning his lowest points into fuel for his greatest success. And that in itself is inspiring. His rise from the depths of failure to the pinnacle of success is nothing short of inspiring. But it's important to remember that Scott's journey wasn't about creating a successful game. It was about overcoming personal demons, facing unimaginable challenges, and adjusting to a life he never expected. Today, Scott is recognized not just for his work on Five Nights at Freddy's, but for the personal journey that life took him, from going from a failure to being triumphant. His story is one of reinvention, hard work, and resilience, and it serves as a reminder that success often comes after struggle and self-doubt. So, next time you think of Five Nights at Freddy's and its eerie lore, remember, the true, hidden lore is about a man behind a curtain, Scott Cawthon, and his incredible journey from the depths of despair to the heights of success.